Mr. Clay's predominant sentiment from first to last was a deep devotion to the cause of human liberty, a strong sympathy with the oppressed everywhere, and an ardent wish for their elevation. Lincoln's eulogy on Henry Clay, July 6, 1852, not only honored one of the greatest statesmen of his time, but was an opportunity for him to reveal within a public forum his own similar beliefs and views about slavery, emancipation, and the preservation of the Union of States guided by constitutional principles. As Lincoln delivered the eulogy, honoring Clay's support for the containment of slavery in new territories, it mirrored his own political thoughts regarding slavery, an issue that was rapidly painting the political landscape in the 1850s. In 1852, Lincoln was a practicing lawyer in Springfield, Illinois, who by then had served a single term in Congress as a representative from Illinois between 1847 to 1849 and had previously served 4 terms, 1834 to 1842, in the Illinois state legislature where he resided. Lincoln had followed and admired Henry Clay's distinguished career as a Whig politician from Kentucky, whose outspoken statements on the evils of slavery and the need for its containment reflected his own. Considered one of the most influential statesmen of his time, Clay was a lawyer, planter, politician, and a great orator, representing Kentucky as both a senator and House representative in Congress who gave numerous speeches and participated in negotiations which led to compromises regarding the issues of slavery and its expansion. Clay had earned the nicknames the Great Compromiser and the Great Pacificator for his role in negotiating and presenting legislation which led to the Missouri Compromises of 1820 and 1850. These events would help postpone the inevitable escalation of a bloody civil war during a time of divisiveness over slavery. Although Clay was also known for his economic programs or the American system, on July 6, 1852, when Lincoln delivered his eulogy, these accomplishments were not mentioned at the memorial service in Springfield, Illinois. He instead spoke about Clay's views on slavery and colonization. It reflected Lincoln's own struggle with an issue of increasing importance. Lincoln understood that slavery had the potential to divide the nation, and its expansion would soon bring him back to the political arena in 1854 with the repeal of the Missouri Compromise. Lincoln referred to Clay as my beau ideal of a statesman, who placed the importance of democratic ideals and the preservation of the Union as his primary goal in politics. As early as 1845, in a letter addressed to Williamson Durley, Lincoln argued that if the Liberty Party, representing abolitionists from the North, had voted for Henry Clay as a Whig in the presidential election of 1844, the extension of slavery would have been prevented. As members of the Whig Party, Lincoln and Clay both attached themselves to the foundational ideals of democracy embodied in the symbolic words of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. Henry Clay's depiction of slavery as a foul blot, who stated that if he could be instrumental in eradicating the steepest stain upon the character of the country, he would, was the impetus that drove both politicians to work towards achieving the elimination of slavery within the framework of the democratic system and the Constitution that embodied it. Lincoln, who had supported Henry Clay in his first failed presidential campaign in 1844, believed a strong position on slavery and its containment would lead to its gradual decay. The eulogy began with a reference to the trials of the first colonists from England and the historical circumstances in which Clay had been born into. It then continued by giving a factual summary of Henry Clay's life. He then described the character traits that made Henry Clay stand out. It was not what Clay said, but how he said it, that made him a great public speaker. Many of these same qualities were characteristic of Lincoln himself. It is probably true he owed his preeminence to no one quality, but to a fortunate combination of several. He was surpassingly eloquent, but many eloquent men fail utterly, and they are not, as a class, generally successful. His judgment was excellent, but many men of good judgment live and die unnoticed. His will was indomitable, but this quality often secures to its owner nothing better than a character for useless obstinacy. These, then, were Mr. Clay's leading qualities. No one of them is very uncommon, but all taken together are rarely combined in a single individual, and this is probably the reason why such men as Henry Clay are so rare in the world. Lincoln went on to state that he never spoke merely to be heard. He never delivered a 4th of July oration or an eulogy on an occasion like this. As a politician or statesman, no one was so habitually careful to avoid all sectional ground. Whatever he did for the whole country. He was stating here that Clay was not a passionate orator who stirred emotions from his audience, but whose use of eloquence, diplomacy, and his ability to convince others to compromise made an impact on those who heard him. Clay's avoidance of sectionalism would reflect in Lincoln's own cautious use of diplomacy in his future political career as the country would endure a civil war which would test his leadership qualities to preserve the Union. 10 years later, in 1862, Lincoln would state in a letter to Horace Greeley that his paramount object in the struggle was to save the Union and not to either save or destroy slavery. Lincoln continued, he loved his country, partly because it was his own country, but mostly because it was a free country, and he burned with a zeal for its advancement, prosperity, and glory, because he saw in such the advancement, prosperity, and glory of human liberty, human right, and human nature. Lincoln had not yet returned to the political arena in 1852, but the eulogy spoke for the ideals that would define his career 2 years later. By referring to liberty and rights as human, he was emphasizing the fact that the Constitution protected the rights of all citizens who lived in the country, and that this was a political ideal that had been embedded in the democratic experiment. Not only was democracy aimed to prove the capability of a people to govern themselves, as he stated in his Lyceum address in 1838, but was based on the idea that all men are created equal. These were the guiding principles that needed to be protected, and defining who is considered human was the question at stake. As Lincoln continued his eulogy, he focused on Clay's views regarding slavery, the divisive issue which was questioning the future integrity of the nation. He expressed a need to clarify and almost apologize that although Clay was a slave owner, he was on principle and in feeling opposed to slavery and did not perceive that on question of human right, the Negroes were to be exempted from the human race, and was cast into life where slavery was deeply embedded into the culture. He was a product of his environment, Lincoln claimed, and his efforts to promote gradual emancipation in Kentucky reflected his true values regarding slavery. He described the two opposing sectional groups which had taken hold in the young republic, the extreme abolitionists of the North and the pro-slavery groups of the South. Henry Clay, Lincoln noted, opposed both for the sake of maintaining the Union and followed a centrist approach of compromise. Again, Lincoln would echo Clay's advocacy to preserve the Union in a speech he gave in Peoria, Illinois, as he prepared to return to political life. Cast into life where slavery was already widely spread and deeply seated, he did not perceive, as I think no wise man has perceived, how it could be at once eradicated without producing a greater evil, even to the cause of human liberty itself. His feeling and his judgment, therefore, ever led him to oppose both extremes of opinion on the subject. Clay's involvement as one of the founders of the American Colonization Society in 1816 promoted the idea of gradual emancipation in combination with the colonization of emancipated black slaves to another continent. Colonization was the answer to the social issues that may result from the integration of emancipated blacks into society. He felt that taking any radical position to emancipation would open the possibility of racial inequalities or a complete dismantling of the Union as a consequence of Southern opposition, which Clay hoped to avoid. As Lincoln continued his political career, he would honor Clay's legacy through his own anti-slavery politics, using compromise as a way to move towards a resolution that would save the Union, abolish slavery, and maintain the democratic ideals established by the founders. Although Clay never lived to see the outcome of Lincoln's accomplishments, his deep influence on Lincoln's views on slavery cannot be underestimated.